Some people enter Harvard through the front gates, others through the back door. And then there are people like her who entered each night through the service corridor with nothing but a key card, a mop, and a dream she hadn't dared to speak aloud in years. Amira Thompson adjusted her faded work jacket as she stepped into the cold marble hallway of Jefferson Hall, Harvard's prestigious science building. It was 1:42 a.m. Her shift had begun an hour earlier, like it did every night. While the world slept, she swept through the corridors of brilliance, dusting chalk-stained desks, wiping fingerprints off doors with names like Dr. Wren and Dr. Liu, and emptying trash bins full of coffee cups and equations scribbled on napkins. She never said a word to the students. Most never noticed her, but she noticed them. Tonight, like many before it, Amira moved swiftly between classrooms. But when she reached room 3.24, the largest lecture hall in the building, something stopped her. A chalkboard hadn't been erased. In fact, it was covered in dense, handwritten formulas that glowed faintly under the desk lamp left on at the lectern. She stared at it, frozen. The equation was beautiful, elegant, complex, yet familiar. A matrix optimization problem with a nonlinear constraint. She had once seen something like it in an old MIT open course on YouTube years ago, back when she had internet at home. Amira dropped her mop. Slowly, almost reverently, she approached the board. Her fingers trembled as she picked up a piece of chalk. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with an old hunger she thought she'd buried. She began to write. Line by line, she worked through the problem, not erasing the professor's work, but adding her own thoughts in a careful script, weaving her understanding alongside the original lecture. Every few steps she stopped, cross-checked, then adjusted. To her, this wasn't just math. This was music. Meanwhile, in a parking lot dimly lit by overhead lamps, Professor Elijah Wren sighed heavily as he closed the trunk of his car. He'd left his notes in room 3.24, handwritten drafts for the upcoming Cambridge Symposium. He couldn't risk them being lost or copied, not when his entire presentation depended on that final piece of the algorithm. The idea was original, cutting edge, and had taken him 8 months to refine. At 2:06 a.m., he re-entered the building, annoyed at his own carelessness. He didn't expect anyone to be inside. That's why, when he turned the corner and saw the light spilling from under the door of 3.24, his eyes narrowed. He opened the door silently. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. A young woman, not a student, stood at the board in janitor's clothes, completely absorbed. She didn't hear him enter. Her back was to him, her short curls pinned beneath a worn gray cap. But it wasn't her appearance that stunned him. It was what she was writing. With perfect symmetry, she was restructuring the final constraint of his model, the part even he hadn't yet cracked. And what she had written made sense. His throat tightened. She turned, sensing him. Their eyes met. She dropped the chalk. I'm sorry, she stammered, eyes wide. I didn't touch anything, I promise. What exactly were you doing? He asked, his voice low, measured. Her lips parted. I was trying to understand. It's a non-linear equation with a nested objective, right? I wasn't going to show anyone. Wren stepped closer. His eyes scanned the board. His jaw clenched. That's not a beginner's mistake, he said. Who taught you how to do that? Amira hesitated, then said softly, No one. I used to watch lectures from the public libraries before I had to drop out. Drop out from where? High school, she said, not meeting his eyes. Senior year, my mom got sick. I started working nights. That was 7 years ago. Silence filled the room. Then Professor Wren did something Amira never expected. He walked over to her chalk marks, stared at them again, then slowly picked up the chalk she dropped. And without a word, he began writing underneath her equation. Amira stood still, unsure what was happening. After a few seconds, he turned to her and said, "You were wrong on the coefficient of friction variable, but only because you didn't know I introduced a constraint in yesterday's lecture." Her heart skipped a beat. "You're saying I was close?" "You were dangerously close," he said. "Closer than some of my graduate students." She blinked. "I just wanted to see if I still had it. Math was always my language." He studied her for a long time. Then he nodded quietly. "Tomorrow, 7 p.m., my office. Don't wear the uniform. Bring your brain." Amira's eyes widened. "Wait, what? Why?" He paused at the door. "Because Harvard doesn't waste talent. Not anymore. And I don't either." Then he was gone. And for the first time in 7 years, Amira didn't feel like a ghost in a genius's world. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she belonged. Here, after all. The knock on Professor Wren's office door was soft, almost apologetic. It was exactly 6:59 p.m. Amira Thompson stood outside room 407 of the Pierce Hall faculty wing, still wondering if this was all a mistake. Her hands were clammy despite the chill in the old building, and she'd changed out of her janitor uniform into the only normal outfit she owned, a pale blue blouse and black slacks she used for job interviews that never called back. She reached for the doorknob, hesitated, then knocked again. "Come in." The voice was as precise as she remembered. She opened the door slowly. The office smelled of old books and faint lavender, and it was surprisingly unpretentious. A massive chalkboard lined one wall, filled with a sea of mathematical scribbles. Piles of journals and notes were scattered across the desk. A mug that said, "Math is only scary until you understand it," rested beside a half-eaten granola bar. Professor Wren looked up from a folder, his silver-rimmed glasses low on his nose. "You're early." "By 1 minute," she replied, her voice barely audible. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Amira obeyed. She sat upright, hands folded in her lap, trying not to look too nervous, but her heart was hammering. "I assume," Wren said, "you think this is a disciplinary meeting?" She nodded slightly. "If I overstepped, I understand." "You did," he replied, "but not in the way you think." Amira blinked. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Let's get a few things straight. What you did, solving part of that equation, wasn't luck. It wasn't guessing. That kind of intuition comes from years of immersion. So the real question is, why are you not in a university?" She swallowed. "I dropped out. My mom, she got sick. Stage 4 breast cancer. I had to work. It was supposed to be temporary, but she didn't make it. And after that, I didn't have the money. Or the time. Life kept getting louder." Professor Wren didn't interrupt. He just listened. And that was somehow more unnerving than if he had judged her. "I still study," she said quickly, afraid silence might make him change his mind. "Public library, free PDFS, YouTube lectures. I keep a notebook, but I haven't done anything real. I'm just a janitor." "No," he said sharply. "You're someone who learns without reward. That's rarer than you think." She met his eyes for the first time. Wren reached into a drawer and pulled out a slim folder. "I had your name run through the admissions archive," he said. "You were accepted to MIT on a full scholarship. Top percentile in the entire state for mathematics. Then Nothing. I declined the offer, she whispered. They didn't know why. They still don't, Wren said. But now I do. He opened the folder, flipped to a page, then slid it across the desk. It was blank except for a single line. If she still wants in, let her in. E.W. Amira stared at it. What is this? An unofficial recommendation, he said. From me. I've submitted your name to the Harvard Extension School. If you pass the placement test next month, you'll qualify for the night program. I've secured a donor to cover the cost. No strings attached. Her eyes widened. Why? Wren looked at her, expression unreadable. Because I've spent the last 20 years teaching privileged students who memorize well and think little. You see patterns. You question. You push. And if I don't fight for minds like yours, then what the hell am I even doing in this office? Amira blinked rapidly. Her throat tightened. You'll still clean, he added matter-of-fact. At least for now, but if you pass, you'll clean less, study more, eventually teach, maybe even change this place. She didn't know whether to cry or laugh. So she did neither. She simply said, Thank you. Wren nodded once, sharply, as if that closed the matter. As she stood to leave, she hesitated. Professor, that board, the problem I tried to solve, did I really come close? He allowed the faintest smile. Closer than I wanted to admit. She smiled back. Just barely. And as Amira walked out into the evening light, the cold air stinging her cheeks, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not relief, not luck, not charity. She felt seen, and for the first time since her mother died, she allowed herself to believe. Maybe my life isn't over. Maybe it hasn't even begun yet. By day, Harvard looked like a castle carved from ambition. By night, it was quieter, a place where whispers lived in the books and ghosts of genius roamed the halls. And for Amira Thompson, it was both home and battlefield. The placement test was 31 days away, and so her new routine began. She worked from 6 p.m. to midnight, vacuuming hallways, restocking restrooms, wiping smudges off glass doors that bore the names of the brilliant. Then, when the last light dimmed and the buildings exhaled into silence, she cracked open her old spiral notebooks, found an empty classroom, and started studying like time was running out. Because it was. Her shift might have ended at midnight, but her real work didn't even start until 12:01 a.m. The first week, the building guards were curious. The second week, they stopped asking. They got used to seeing her sitting under the projector light in room 2.14, surrounded by crumpled pages and equations taped to the whiteboard like battle plans. Her desk was a war zone of coffee cups and half-eaten peanut butter crackers. But in the middle of it all sat a girl who refused to give up. One night, a student walked by and sneered, "A janitor doing calculus?" Cute. Amira didn't look up. She'd heard worse. She simply turned the page and kept going. Professor Wren checked in just once. He opened the door one night at 2:18 a.m. and watched her from the back of the room. She hadn't noticed him. Her fingers danced across the keys of a borrowed laptop, graphing inequalities and reciting derivative rules under her breath. She whispered like they were prayers. He stayed for 3 minutes, then left. He didn't need to say anything. On the third Friday, Amira hit a wall. It was nearly 3 a.m., and her brain refused to cooperate. No matter how many times she read the theorem, the numbers blurred, the symbols tangled. Her eyes burned, her hands shook. She slammed the textbook shut. The sound echoed through the empty hall. "What am I doing?" she whispered. The room didn't answer. Her chest ached, not from exhaustion, but from fear. She wasn't a student. She wasn't like them. They had parents who hired tutors, connections, safety nets. She had mop handles and worn shoes. Who was she kidding? She rested her head on the desk. But then, her phone buzzed. A message from an unsaved number. Hard problems don't get solved in one night, but strong minds don't quit either. E.W. Her heart stopped. Professor Wren. He had never texted her before. She stared at the screen. Then slowly, she opened the textbook again. And she began again, line by line, whisper by whisper. By week 4, she had memorized the test format, reviewed 3 years of advanced curriculum, and rebuilt a part of herself that she didn't know was salvageable. Some nights her legs gave out from cleaning. Some mornings she barely made it back to her shared apartment before sunrise. But in those hours of midnight math and whispered hope, something changed. Not the world, not Harvard. Her. Amira no longer looked at the campus like a visitor. She looked at it like someone climbing the steps to where she was always meant to be. The night before the test, she left the mop in the supply closet early and walked straight to the study room. But this time, she wasn't alone. When she opened the door, Professor Wren was already there, seated at the corner, a cup of tea in front of him. "You're early," she said. "You're predictable," he replied. He gestured to the seat beside him. On the table lay a small, worn envelope. "What's this?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "It's from your mother." Amira froze. "She wrote it after your acceptance to MIT," Wren continued. "I reached out to the hospital records. One of the nurses saved it. Said she never got the chance to give it to you." With trembling fingers, Amira opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was uneven. "My sweet Amira, if you're reading this, it means you didn't give up. You were always the brightest thing in every room, brighter than equations, brighter than pain. Don't let the world dim that light. Keep going, keep learning, keep building something beautiful with that brain of yours." Amira's tears fell silently onto the paper. Professor Wren didn't speak. He didn't need to. At exactly 4:03 a.m., she folded the letter, placed it into her notebook, and whispered, "I'm ready." The room smelled like chalk dust and expectation. It was 8:57 a.m. Amira stood in the hallway outside room 5.01 of Harvard's Department of Mathematics, her hands cold, despite the spring sunshine spilling through the stained glass windows. Inside, a panel of 3 faculty members waited. The placement test wasn't just a written exam, it was a gauntlet. Only 10 students were invited to take it each term. Only 2 or 3 passed, and none of them wore second-hand shoes and carried a janitor's ID in their pocket. Amira adjusted the strap of her canvas bag and inhaled deeply. She could still feel the texture of her mother's letter inside, tucked neatly between her notes, close to her heart. Then the door opened. "Ms. Thompson?" the proctor asked. She stepped inside. The room was cavernous. Ancient wood, tall windows, a single desk in the center, hers. Along the far wall sat 3 professors behind a table, silent and unreadable. Among them was Professor Elijah Wren, his fingers laced, expression as neutral as ever. She didn't look at him. She couldn't. A test booklet lay on the desk. No electronics, no calculators, just a pencil, a blank notepad, and her mind. "You have 3 hours, the proctor said. "You may begin." The first problem was meant to intimidate. A nested matrix with variable conditions and nonlinear constraints. Most would need 20 minutes just to understand the question. Amira read it once, twice. Then her pencil began to move. Every night of quiet, every whisper in the dark, every mistake she'd corrected alone. It all came back now, flowing through her hands like music she'd practiced in silence. By problem 3, her shoulders relaxed. By problem 5, she didn't notice the clock. But problem 8 was different. She stared at it. It was a theoretical prompt, less about solving and more about insight. It asked not what the answer was, but why the structure of the problem mattered. Amira's chest tightened. This wasn't math. It was philosophy, confidence. She stared at the page, then at her blank sheet. For a moment, the voice of doubt came back. "You don't belong here. You're a janitor trying to wear a scholar's shoes." But then softly, another voice broke through. Her mother's. "You were always the brightest thing in every room." She put pencil to paper. When the 3 hours ended, Amira stood up slowly. Her fingers were ink-stained. Her back ached, but her eyes were steady. As she walked to the front to turn in her test, one of the professors leaned in and whispered to Wren, "The janitor girl?" "Really, Elijah? Even if she's decent, what does it say about our standards?" Amira heard it. Her hands clenched at her sides. She paused, just long enough for Professor Wren to respond. He didn't raise his voice, didn't flinch. He simply said, "It says we finally remembered what potential looks like." Amira met his gaze, just for a second, and this time she didn't look away. That evening, she returned to her shift. No one knew she had just taken the hardest math test of her life. No one knew she had just heard a professor question her worth. And no one knew how much it meant to hear someone defend her with such certainty. She mopped the same halls, emptied the same trash, but she walked taller now. She moved through the night not as someone unseen, but as someone remembered. 3 days later, an envelope slid under her door. Plain white, Harvard seal. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. One sentence. "Congratulations, Ms. Thompson. You've been accepted into the Harvard Extension Program for Mathematics with full tuition awarded." Below that, one more note. Handwritten. "You didn't just pass, Amira. You outscored every applicant. Welcome to the other side of the chalkboard." E.W. She sat on the floor, letter in hand, heart pounding. And for the first time in years, she smiled. Not the kind of smile that hides struggle, but the kind that says, "I made it." The first time Amira walked into Harvard as a student, no one held the door for her. She didn't expect them to, but she noticed it. The way a former ghost notices every flicker of light. The classroom was modern, glass walls, ceiling screens, and whiteboards that stretched from floor to ceiling. Students filtered in with sleek laptops, designer coats, and practiced boredom. Amira wore a second-hand backpack and a scarf her mother had knitted the winter before she passed. She found a seat in the back, quiet, small, forgettable. But she was not there to be noticed. She was there to learn. The professor, Dr. Monroe, a younger man with sharp glasses and an even sharper tongue, walked in 2 minutes late and dropped a stack of printed syllabi onto the front desk. He glanced around the room with a smirk. "Welcome to Applied Structures in Nonlinear Mathematics. If you're here to be comfortable, you're in the wrong department." A few students chuckled. Amira didn't. She read the syllabus like scripture, underlining every project, every deadline. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from determination. She'd waited 7 years for this. She wasn't going to blink now, but it didn't take long for the whispers to start. On the second day, during group assignment pairings, one student, Jason, top of the class, clean haircut, blazer, glanced at her and said, "Sorry, I think there's been a mix-up. That's the janitor, right?" The others laughed. Amira said nothing. She didn't need to, because when the professor reviewed the assignment submissions, only one group had solved the final problem using a recursive reduction model that cut processing time in half. Herr Dr. Monroe paused at the projector screen. "Who solved this?" Amira raised her hand. The room went quiet. Monroe stared, then said flatly, "Huh. Well, try not to make the rest of us look bad again." Some chuckled awkwardly. Amira didn't smile. She just underlined one more sentence in her notebook. But brilliance didn't stop the weight of being alone. She sat alone at lunch, studied alone in corners of the library, walked home at night past buildings she used to mop, still wearing shoes that pinched her toes. Some nights, she considered quitting. The loneliness was louder than the failure had ever been, but then she'd pull out her mother's letter. She didn't need friends yet. She needed foundation. 2 weeks into the program, Dr. Wren stopped her in the hallway. "Walk with me," he said. She matched his stride, notebook in hand. "You've made a stir," he said, not looking at her. "Jason sent a formal complaint, said you humiliated him." She raised an eyebrow. "By solving the problem? By existing in a space he thought was reserved for people who look like him?" Amira exhaled through her nose. "What did you say?" "I said, the board doesn't care what shoes you wear, only what your mind can build on it." She smiled, barely. "Do you ever get tired of being right?" she asked. "Only when people stop listening." That night, she stayed after class to finish a proof no one else had touched. As she erased the board, a girl from the front row, Natalie, quiet, observant, approached her. "Hey," she said, "that recursive model, I've never seen anyone do it like that. Could you show me sometime?" Amira blinked. It wasn't much, but it was the first brick in a bridge. She walked home under the starlight, head up, heart heavy, but alive. The numbers didn't care who you were. They didn't ask for background, money, or polish. They just asked, "Will you keep showing up?" And Amira did. Every single night. By the 5th week of the semester, Amira's name was no longer just a quiet line on the attendance sheet. It was being whispered, not kindly. "Have you seen her notes?" She solved the Monroe conjecture in 3 pages. "I heard she used to mop this hallway. She still does sometimes. She's not even one of us." But numbers didn't lie, and neither did results. Dr. Monroe, sharp-tongued, impossible to impress, had begun referencing her work in class. Even Natalie, once hesitant, now studied beside her every Tuesday, asking genuine questions with wide, curious eyes. Still, not everyone was pleased. Jason, still bitter from their group assignment fiasco, began a silent campaign of exclusion. When paired with Amira in class, he ignored her input. When she spoke, he rolled his eyes. And when she was absent from a study group once due to a double shift, he told the others, "She's not serious. Just a novelty act Harvard's trying out to look progressive." But Amira didn't answer back. She answered in the only way she knew how. She kept solving. It was on a rainy Thursday that it all came to a head. Dr. Monroe announced a midterm challenge, an optional problem set posted online. One question, unsolved for years. Whoever cracked it would earn a recommendation letter for any graduate program in the country. The problem was simple in appearance, a variant of the classic Ramsey theorem, but with an added time-dependent matrix and topological constraint. Most students read it, blinked, and closed the file. Amira stayed up 3 nights in a row. She worked in the corner of Lamont Library, until her hand cramped and her notes curled from spilled tea. She erased the board in her apartment so many times that her fingers were chalk-stained through breakfast. On the fourth night, at 2:46 a.m., it clicked. She rewrote it from the ground up, not using brute force, but by seeing a pattern hidden in the time shift, something that had been missed in prior approaches. She used a harmonic fold between time states, turning chaos into coherence. It wasn't elegant, it was new, and it worked. She submitted it at dawn. The next day, her phone rang. It was Professor Wren. "I reviewed your proof," he said. "So did Monroe, and Liu, and Zhang Paws. They found no flaws." Amira exhaled. "But there's something you need to know," he added. She sat up straighter. "What?" "Jason filed a formal protest, claimed you plagiarized it, said someone like you couldn't have produced work like that alone." Amira's stomach dropped. "I'll show my notes, my process. I saved every step." "You don't have to," Wren replied calmly. "I've already sent your progression log to the board. I've seen the timestamps, the evolution, the revisions. No one solves a problem like that accidentally." Silence. Then his voice softened. "You didn't just solve the theorem, Amira. You solved the part of me that forgot why I started teaching." A week later, the official verdict arrived. Valid, original, confirmed. Her name was listed beside the problem's entry on the university board. Solved by A. Thompson, March 15th, 10:11 a.m. No fanfare, no applause. Just quiet, lasting proof. And it was enough. That Friday, Dr. Monroe handed her a sealed envelope at the end of class. He didn't smile, but he said, "There's not a lot of people I'd write a letter like this for. Don't waste it." She nodded, tucking it into her book, heart heavy with something that felt dangerously close to pride. Outside, as she walked past the math building's reflecting pool, Jason was waiting. "Still think you belong here?" he asked. Amira paused, looked at him. Then she opened her notebook to a page filled with scribbles, graphs, matrices, folds of logic that bled into intuition. She held it up. "No," she said. "I don't think I belong here." She smiled. "I earned it." Then she walked away, not fast, not triumphant, just steady, like someone who knew that the pushback was just another kind of proof. When the email arrived, Amira thought it was a mistake. Subject: personal invitation from Dean Howell. Message: we would be honored by your presence at the faculty evening reception. Friday, 6 p.m., Pierce Hall Terrace. Formal attire recommended. She stared at it for a long time. In her world, formal attire usually meant clean shoes and a shirt without bleach stains. She reread the sender 3 times to make sure it wasn't spam. It wasn't. It was real. And suddenly, terrifying. That Friday, just before sunset, Amira stood outside the marble steps of Pierce Hall, wearing a simple black dress she'd borrowed from Natalie. Her curls were tied back with trembling fingers. She looked at the lights glowing through the windows and wondered if she'd made a mistake. She didn't belong here. Not really. Not with wine glasses and polished conversation and scholars who had never once skipped a meal to pay rent. But then she remembered Wren's words. The board doesn't care what shoes you wear, only what your mind can build on it. And so she stepped inside. The terrace sparkled with soft string lights and subtle violin music. Professors mingled with donors. Students with titles stood in neat circles holding glasses of sparkling water and speaking in perfectly measured tones. Amira walked quietly to the edge, unnoticed, until she wasn't. "Amira Thompson," a voice said behind her, "in the flesh." She turned to see Dean Howell, a tall, stately man in his 60s with silver hair, crisp posture, and the kind of smile that rarely reached the eyes. He extended his hand. "Your proof caused quite the conversation in the faculty room." "Hopefully not the bad kind," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "On the contrary, it's rare we see someone leap so far, so fast, from a broom closet to a theorem board." She stiffened slightly at that, but he didn't notice, or didn't care. "I imagine you've had to work harder than most," he continued. She nodded. "It wasn't optional." He tilted his head. "And now that you're here, what is your goal? Grad school? A research grant? A tech firm could snap you up tomorrow." Amira paused. "I haven't decided yet," she said. He smiled again. "Well, if you ever want introductions, you're in the right room." Then he moved on. As the night wore on, others approached her, some curious, some patronizing, some with offers that sounded like favors and smelled like charity. But none of them asked what mattered most, not why she fought so hard, not what she truly wanted, until one quiet voice broke through the noise. "I saw your submission," said an older woman standing near the refreshment table. "You didn't just solve the problem, you saw it differently." Amira turned. The woman extended her hand. "Dr. Evelyn Marshall. I used to teach here. Retired now, but I still haunt events like these." Amira shook her hand. Dr. Marshall smiled. "Tell me, dear, what was going through your head when you were scribbling that proof at 3 a.m.? Amira blinked. "I wasn't thinking about impressing anyone. I was thinking about how time moves differently for people who wait too long to be seen." Dr. Marshall looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "You're not here to chase titles, are you?" she said softly. "No," Amira replied. "I'm here because someone believed in me before I believed in myself, and because I have a little sister at home who still thinks janitors don't go to Harvard." Dr. Marshall's smile warmed. "Then make her believe otherwise." As the crowd thinned and the sky turned navy blue, Professor Wren found her standing at the edge of the terrace, her glass still full, untouched. "Survive the jungle?" he asked. "Barely," she said. He looked at her, serious now. "You're going to get more of these invitations," he said. "You're going to be offered things that glitter but don't grow. Be careful what you say yes to." She nodded. "Have you thought about what comes next?" he asked. She looked out at the soft-lit campus beyond the glass. "I don't want to just publish papers or sign deals," she said. "I want to build something, maybe a learning space, for people like me, who came in through the back door." He smiled. "Good," he said. "Then don't let the front door impress you too much." That night, she walked home alone through the quiet streets of Cambridge. The heels pinched, the dress itched, the compliments from strangers already faded like smoke, but her steps were steady. Because for the first time, Amira wasn't wondering if she belonged in the room. She was wondering how many more people like her were still outside, waiting for someone to open the door. It came in a gold-embossed envelope. Tucked between flyers for textbook rentals and an overdue library notice, it looked almost out of place. Amira stared at it as if it might disappear. Harvard Institute of Theoretical Research Office of Dr. Eleanor Chung. Confidential invitation. Private fellowship proposal. Inside, it read, "Ms. Amira Thompson, you are formally invited to apply for the Newton Hawking Fellowship. a research-based, full-ride scholarship designed for high-potential candidates in applied mathematics. The position includes a private stipend, guaranteed mentorship under Dr. Chung, and the opportunity to publish in the university's most prestigious academic journals. Only 2 applicants will be selected per year. At the bottom, handwritten, "I've reviewed your Ramsey proof. We need thinkers like you. Let's talk soon. E. Cheung." Amira exhaled. She had heard of the Newton-Hawking Fellowship. Everyone had. It was the fast lane to a PhD. It opened doors that others spent lifetimes knocking on. And now, she was being invited in. The meeting was scheduled for Friday at noon. Amira arrived 10 minutes early. The hallway was sleek, marble-lined, full of light and hushed echoes. She smoothed her shirt, clutched her notes. Her palms were sweating. Dr. Eleanor Chung was already waiting, elegant, poised, a legend in the world of academic mathematics. Her office walls were lined with first-edition books and awards Amira couldn't name. "Sit, please," Chung said with a warm smile. "I just wanted to say thank you." "No need," the woman interrupted kindly. "You earned this. What you did with that theorem. It was the kind of thinking we look for at the research level." Amira blinked. "So, I'm being considered?" "Considered?" Chung laughed. "You're leading. But there's one detail we should discuss." The smile faded just slightly. "This fellowship is not just about intellect. It's about direction, focus. We invest in scholars who are fully committed to the Institute, which means no outside work, no distractions, including part-time jobs." Amira stiffened. "You mean I can't work while studying?" "Exactly. Full immersion," Chung said smoothly. "You'd move into housing. We'd provide everything. Meals, books, travel. You'd be a scholar, not a story." "A story?" Amira echoed. Chung folded her hands. "Let me be frank. The press loves a good janitor-to-genius narrative, but that's not what we're about. We need thinkers who can step away from that baggage." Amira sat very still. "This isn't about your past," Chung said. "It's about who you're willing to become." That night, Amira didn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the letter on her nightstand. No work, no side jobs, no contact with her support group where she tutored other underprivileged youth. No night shifts, no helping Natalie study, no calls with her sister during her part-time job at the diner, just research. She would have the best equipment, the best professors, the most respected path. But at what cost? She whispered into the dark. "If I leave behind everything I fought through, do I still carry the reason why I started?" The next morning, she went to Professor Wren's office. He was reviewing drafts with a red pen, but looked up when she entered. "You got it?" he said flatly, as if he already knew. She nodded. "And?" "They want me to walk away from everything, from who I was." Wren leaned back in his chair. "They want the product, not the process," he said. "And what do you think I should do?" He shrugged. "Doesn't matter what I think. But ask yourself this. What's more powerful? Becoming what they expect? Or staying who you are and still rising?" She didn't respond, but he saw it in her eyes. 3 days later, she sat again in Dr. Cheung's office. The older woman smiled. "So, are we welcoming you aboard?" Amira placed a single sheet of paper on the desk, her rejection. Chung blinked. "I don't understand." "You offered me gold," Amira said gently. "But my roots are still in the dirt, and that dirt is where I grow from." Chung's expression hardened. "You're turning down the most prestigious opportunity in this program." Amira stood up. "I'm not turning down opportunity," she said. "I'm turning down erasure." That night, Amira returned to her small apartment, took off her coat, and opened her notebook. She didn't have a fellowship. She didn't have a stipend. She had her shift at 7 p.m. and a dream that hadn't been sold, renamed, or repackaged. And that was enough. Harvard didn't make announcements when janitors became teachers. There were no banners, no spotlights, no press releases, just an empty classroom, a dusty chalkboard, and a message from Professor Wren that simply read, Room 2.14, Thursday. 3 p.m. Professor Liu is out. They need someone to cover the advanced recursion seminar. I gave them your name. No ceremony. Just trust. Amira stood in front of the classroom 10 minutes early. Same room, same board. Same echo in the floor as the mop she used to push years ago, but this time she held chalk in her hand, not to clean around it, but to write on it. The door opened. Students filed in, slow at first, then steadily. Some recognized her, some stared. Others whispered, Wait, that's her, right? She's not a real professor. I thought she was just some scholarship case. But none of that mattered now, because at 3:01 p.m., Amira picked up the chalk and wrote 5 simple words on the board. What patterns do you miss? The students went silent. She turned to face them. I'm not going to throw formulas at you for the next hour, she said, because recursion isn't about memorizing symbols. It's about seeing what others overlook. Repetition with direction, loops with purpose. Like life. Someone in the back shifted uncomfortably. Amira didn't flinch. When I was 16, I could solve any problem on paper, but I couldn't solve my reality. I had to drop out of school to take care of my mother. For years, I mopped floors in this building. At night, I studied what others threw away. She paused. A few students looked up, really looked maybe for the first time. I wasn't supposed to be here, and I definitely wasn't supposed to be up here. She tapped the board. But sometimes the most elegant equations come from the most unexpected places. She turned and began writing a recursive proof, the same one she once solved at 2 a.m. on this exact board. Her hands moved smoothly, confident, not because she was certain of everything, but because she had earned the right to be uncertain, out loud, on a stage, with chalk in hand. By the end of the lesson, the room was still, and then a sound Amira would never forget. Applause. Not thunderous, not dramatic, but genuine. Hands clapped slowly, then more joined in. Not because of her proof, but because she had shown them what learning really looked like. Messy, real, defiant. After class, a student lingered behind. Natalie. She stepped forward, eyes shining. Hey, I recorded your talk, she said. I hope that's okay. It just felt important. Amira smiled. Why? Natalie looked down, then back up. Because I don't know anyone who looks like me that's ever stood there. Not until today. That night, the video found its way online. It didn't go viral overnight, but it started traveling, from inboxes to classrooms, from underfunded schools to late-night study groups. A janitor turned Harvard instructor teaches recursion like she's writing poetry. I showed this to my daughter. She cried. She's applying to college now. This is what education is supposed to be. Amira didn't watch the views climb. She didn't need to. Because every time she stepped back into that classroom and heard the soft shuffle of notebooks and saw eyes that once doubted now daring to believe, she knew. Her story wasn't about becoming the teacher. It was about reminding others they've always had permission to learn. The clock on the wall blinked softly. 2:04 a.m., same building, same silence. Same glow from the hallway lamp outside room 2.14. But nothing was the same. Amira stood in the doorway for a moment, her fingers curled around a key she no longer needed, not because the door was locked, but because now she had the right to open it. Inside, 5 students waited quietly, some with tired eyes, others with caffeine-stained smiles. All of them different backgrounds, different burdens, different reasons why they didn't fit the mold. But they were here, because she had once been. On the board behind her, someone had written, "Midnight Mentorship, Session 1." A joke at first. Now, a tradition. Every Thursday night after the campus fell asleep, Amira held informal lessons for those who didn't raise their hands in class, because no one had ever told them they could. And they came, trickling in one by one, like her years ago. Some janitors, some single moms, some students on the edge of dropping out. All of them brilliant in quiet ways the world didn't always notice. Amira set down her bag and picked up a piece of chalk. She tapped the board gently. "Okay," she said. "Who here thinks recursion is scary?" All 5 hands went up. She smiled. "Good. Then we're exactly where we're supposed to be." One of the students, a tall girl named Marisol, raised her hand tentatively. "Miss Thompson, how did you know you were good enough?" Amira looked at her, then slowly walked toward the window. "When I was your age," she said softly, "I mopped this hallway. I'd finish my shift and sneak into this room, just to touch the chalk." She turned back to them. "I didn't know I was good enough. I didn't even think I was visible. But I kept showing up anyway." A beat of silence. "Courage," she said, "isn't about being sure. It's about being willing." As the lesson moved forward, Amira caught herself smiling at the small things. The way someone's eyes lit up when a formula clicked, the way another scribbled fiercely, mouthing the steps like a prayer, the quiet "ooh" when one proof finally made sense. It was familiar and sacred and loud in a soft kind of way. At the end of the session, as students packed their bags, Marisol lingered. "I want to do what you do one day," she said shyly. "Not just the math, the way you make people feel like they matter." Amira placed a hand on her shoulder. "You already are," she whispered. "Just don't let anyone tell you the quiet ones aren't loud enough to change the world." That night, as the lights dimmed and the building emptied, Amira stayed behind. She erased the board, not out of habit, but out of reverence. Then she picked up a fresh stick of chalk, wrote one small sentence in the corner, and left. She stayed, so we could begin. Because this was never just about a janitor solving equations. It was about a girl who whispered to herself in the dark, until one day she whispered loud enough for the world to listen. And when it did, she didn't take the spotlight for herself. She shared it. So no one else would ever have to start alone again at 2 a.m.